Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. We continue here. The Electoral Commission this week issued the third quarter disclosure report for political party funding for the 2024-25 financial year. The party that declared and received the most in the quarter is the ANC. The party declared just under 13 million rand in donations. In second place is the DA, which received 4.2 million rand, with the referendum party receiving the third most at just over 900,000 rand worth of declared donations. To talk us through the report and how these donations are declared, I am joined now by the IEC's manager for political party funding, that's Matsubane Nkoko. Mr. Nkoko, good to have you on the program this evening. So the third quarter donations report shows a sharp increase in donations. What do you think caused the rise, and why was there a shift in this political party fundraising strategies?
Good evening, Nhlanhla, and good evening to the viewers. The third quarter donations, the figures, they do not depart much really, although we see 10 million rand difference between this quarter and the previous quarter, which we reported on in November of 2024. There was, last time there was about 5 million or so, and this time around it's 18 million rand. However, the number of parties is still quite small. I think we're seeing only 4 political parties this time around that are declaring. It goes to show, I think, for the most part, that in the absence of election activity in particular, there's very little fundraising activity that is going on. You'll also realize that in this particular quarter, the donors to these major parties, the ANC, the DA, what you'd call, regular donors or repeat donors. For the ANC would be your Chancellor House, would be your Botu commercial enterprise, who, they show at least twice, thrice in a financial year. For the DAs, your usual, your Frederick Newman Foundation, your Danish Liberal Democracy Program. So you can see that there wasn't really much. It's really just the run-of-the-mill kind of donations that we are seeing in this quarter.
Matsubane, about 11.7% of donations came from foreign sources. How does the IEC then ensure compliance with South Africa's Political Funding Act, especially for donations aimed at specific activities?
Right. The foreign donations are allowed in terms of our legislation. However, they are very stringently regulated. For example, a foreign donor need not be a government entity or a government department or an agency, as it were. However, private entities are allowed to donate to political parties locally, but that amount is limited to 5 million in rand terms. And that money cannot be used for any other thing except for training or research and development and so forth. So you'll see that even with these particular political parties, they have declared what they received these particular donations for. You'll see for the Democratic Alliance that it was, training for those that are now deployed in provincial and national legislatures or local government. And for BOSA as well, for Build One South Africa, they indicated that that was towards, payment for training or for hotel accommodation for the purposes of training. So we look at those specific details that are provided, and they must be provided with evidence to say this money was spent on those specific items rather than, for any other thing that is not in the law.
So the referendum party was flagged for late donation declarations. What actions does the IEC then take, especially when deadlines are missed? And how are penalties then imposed?
That's absolutely correct. We learned that this donation was made in June last year. You can imagine run about, the elections of the election period last year. And some 6 months later, they are only coming forward now to say there was this particular donation. Now, they have been served with a direction in terms of, a certain provision in the Act. I think it's Section 15 of the Act. They have been served with that direction to tell us what happened, why are you only declaring this money now? Please provide us with details, with reasons why you are declaring this late, And based on those reasons, the Commission may then invoke certain parts of the legislation that may include, going to the Electoral Court. And some of the possible outcomes from the Electoral Court is to actually, charge them a penalty, or in a worst case scenario, basically get that money forfeited to the Commission so that it can be shared by other political parties.
Mm. So the ANC leads in donations, especially from regular donors, like you mentioned. How does the IEC then monitor repeat donors to prevent undue influence or conflicts of interest, if you will?
Correct. This information, Tandla, is on record. We can go back as far back as 2021 sometime in terms of who has donated and how much they have donated. You are aware that although it's a subject of parliamentary debates, there is a limit that a single donor can donate a maximum of 15 million rand to a political party in a financial year. As an example, the Butu Commercial Enterprises has donated 10 million rand at this point. Now, that's the until the end of the financial year, we have to now check whether they are donating some more money. If they are going to donate, it shouldn't be more than the remaining 5 million rand of the total amount they can donate themselves. So it's those kind of figures that we look at, and we make sure that they do not exceed. Further to that, in the event that they have exceeded, the law is very clear. Such money, any amount beyond the 15 million rand, without even going back and forth, that money will be forfeited to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund so that it can be shared by other political parties. So we do monitor those figures very closely.
Right. With public concerns about transparency in political party funding, how does the IEC then ensure transparency, especially in donation sources, but also declarations as well?
Ntlantla, this legislation, the way it's crafted, it relies heavily on self-reporting. Political parties have to self-report to the Commission on a quarterly basis. So for every time that they receive about 100,000 donation from an individual source, they must come forward so that we can report as we have done in this particular quarter. However, there would be those, like, for example, the referendum party. If they have failed to declare, come the end of the financial year, in September in particular, they have to submit audited financial statements to us. Now, it's out of those audited financial statements where we rely heavily on the professionalism and the work of the auditors, who should be registered with the independent regulatory body, ERBA in particular. They must look at all that information and say to us, all the money that needed to have been disclosed during the quarter has been disclosed. Where it hasn't, such information must be made very clear in the audited financial statement, and then the Commission will then take the appropriate steps about it. I can tell you right now that with the financial statements that were submitted last September, we have done a very thorough review, and we are at the tail end now, where we will soon be publishing the annual report. Out of that, I can tell you right now, without mentioning the party, that there is a party or two where there's a certain amount that was not declared to the Commission during the quarter. That was picked up by the auditor, was reported to us by the auditor, and necessary steps will be taken as soon as this whole process is done.
Matsubane, very quickly, if you may, several in-kind donations were also reported during this process. How does the IEC then assess the value of these donations to ensure accurate reporting?
That's a very interesting one. One, for example, the IEC does not have, a table of figures in terms of saying if you rented a bus, it would cost you this much. If you, rented a venue, it would cost this much. Most of that is reported on by the political parties concerned. However, with the review that we are undertaking, Ntlantla, the review of audited financial statements and all of that, we look at such information where you cannot undervalue, a particular service that has been provided as an in-kind donation. We look at those, and we've got the right in terms of the legislation to further investigate and request your books to be able to go through your documentation, your books, to see whether you have undervalued or overvalued. In cases where we feel that you have undervalued, we've got a right once again to approach the electoral court and present our case, where the electoral court will be the final arbiter on that particular matter, about whether you underreported or you reported correctly. So it is a very rather not very straightforward matter, but the law does provide us those powers. And unfortunately, up to this point, we haven't been able to. We haven't had to go to court in that regard. But it is something that we are very much looking at, in terms of whether there are no chance takers, if I may put it that way.
Thank you so much for your time. That's Matsubani Nkoko from the IEC.